Today I'm sharing easy Dollar Tree DIY crafts you can make right now. Affordable sunflower projects that are perfect for cozy fall decorating. These ideas are quick, beginner friendly, and will add instant autumn charm to your home. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss any of my upcoming DIY projects. If you don't have a lot of time to craft, I want to show you how you can make a really quick and easy wreath to get ready for fall. I'm using one of these 14-inch wreath rings from the Dollar Tree. This one's in silver, but it really doesn't matter which color you grab. I also have 2 rolls of ribbon that work well together, and of course I'll be using some sunflowers. The green ribbon that I'm using is from the Dollar Tree, and it is on the thinner side. So before I start wrapping my wreath form, I'm going to take a piece of felt and I'm just cutting it down to strips that are about 1.5 to 2 inches wide. And I'm going to place a little hot glue on my wreath form and just lay these strips over the wreath form. It doesn't have to be neat. It's just going to act as a little buffer so that you can't see through the ribbon to the wreath form. And I happen to have a color of felt on hand that matched the ribbon, so that worked out well for me. Now, if you're using a different kind of ribbon that is a bit thicker, you could probably skip this step. The other reason that I always like to place felt down on the wreath form first is it just helps hide those wires a little bit so that you don't see the ridges of them through the ribbon. Once all of my felt was in place, then I could start adding my ribbon. I added a little bit of hot glue to the backside of my wreath form and I just held my ribbon in place there, and then I got to work wrapping it around the entire wreath form. I did wrap it on a slight angle and I tried to space the ribbon out as far as I could without showing any of that wreath in between the wraps. Now this roll of ribbon that I'm using was a brand new roll from the Dollar Tree, so it had about 9 feet of ribbon on it, and on this 14-inch wreath form that was perfect. I was able to get the whole way around the wreath using that 9 feet of ribbon. So just keep that in mind. If you have a partial roll, just make sure you have about 9 feet and you'll be able to cover the entire wreath form. Before I start adding flowers to my wreath, I wanted to get my bow ready, so using the coordinating ribbon, I just folded it into the awareness ribbon shape, and then I cinched everything together in the middle and tied it with some twine. I always have good luck making this bow. It comes together pretty quick and easy for me, but if you want something a little bit more quick that you don't have to fuss with, the Dollar Tree does sell pre-made bows, especially for fall. I think they're really pretty, so that would be a good alternative to making your own. Now it's time for the fun part, getting all of the flowers on the wreath. I'm choosing to keep all of my flowers just to one side in a small section, but you can decorate yours however you'd like. If you want to fill the whole thing up with flowers, you could do that too. I started by adding some longer pieces that had some texture to them, and I wanted those to stick up behind my flowers. Then as I pulled my flowers and leaves off of the stem, I made sure that I clipped off the little plastic part where the leaves or the flower connect to the actual wire stem. This just helps them lay a little bit flatter up against the wreath form. Now I like to use sunflowers, especially this time of year, because I feel like it's a good flower to help transition from summer into fall. But keep this wreath in mind because these are pretty easy to make, so you could customize them to fit whatever season you're in or whatever your personal style is. So I just kept clipping off my flowers from the stem and gluing them on in a little bundle on the one side of my wreath form. After I had a nice bundle of flowers in place, then I hot glued my bow to the bottom of them, and then as a finishing touch, I took another sunflower and hot glued it to the center of my bow. I'm all about trying to use up things that I already have in my craft room, so I want to make a really simple pennant style garland for the front of my mantle. I have some scrap pieces of burlap, an open roll of ribbon, a few floral arrangements that have some pieces missing from it, and I have a few pieces of scrap cardboard. Now, because I don't have one large piece of cardboard to work with, I went ahead and made myself a pattern for my pennants to start. So you can see here, my triangle is 4 inches across the top and it's about 7 inches long. This just made it a little bit easier since I could only cut a few pennants out of each piece of scrap cardboard I had. And this way I'll be able to hang on to this for the next time that I want to make a garland. I'm only going to be making 5 pennants for my garland because I know that's what will fit great across the front of my fireplace, but you can make as many as you need. I'm using a Sharpie to trace the shapes out on my cardboard, and then I'm just using a utility knife to cut each one out. Before adding the burlap to my pennants, I wanted to punch some holes in the corner of each one. So I'm just using a standard hole punch here. This punched through the cardboard with no issue. Some of the pieces of cardboard were just a bit thicker, so I had a little bit of a hard time squeezing it into the hole punch, but it was no problem to punch the holes out. The reason I created a base from the cardboard and not just use the burlap on its own is because I found in the past that when I've tried to just use the burlap, as it was hanging as a garland, it would start to curl up and not hold its shape. And because the cardboard is the same color as the burlap, it was perfect to create a base with the cardboard. I used just a minimal amount of hot glue on the front of my cardboard base, and then I laid it into the burlap using my silicone mat because it will seep through the fabric of the burlap, and then I just cut off the excess around the outside of my cardboard base. Now my burlap, the weave is pretty big, so I wasn't worried about those holes. I just made sure that I didn't add any glue that would cover up the holes that I had punched, and I was able to just separate the weave of the burlap whenever I needed to get access to those holes that I had punched. You can decorate these up however you'd like. Of course, I want the sunflower to be the star of the show, but I did want to add a few extra textures and colors. So I added a few pieces first that would hang down from underneath my sunflower. And then I did want to use the leaves that also came with my sunflower bunch, but I found it was easier if I took the plastic piece out of the leaf before I added it. And then on the back side of the sunflower, I wanted it to lay flatter, so I did have to cut off a bit of the excess plastic just to make sure that it would lay flat. I also kept in mind as I was decorating not to put anything too close to those holes that I had punched so that I could weave my ribbon through later. Now, like I said, you can decorate this however you'd like. You could just keep it really simple and just hot glue a sunflower to the middle of the pennant. I think that would be pretty also. But like I said, I'm trying to use up things that I already have, and I had some scrap florals laying around, so I thought this would be a great place to use up a few of those pieces. The last thing I needed to do to finish up this garland was just add my pennants to my ribbon. I found this was easiest to do with the back end of a paintbrush. I was able to use that end to move some of the fibers out of the way, and then I put the ribbon over the tip of the paintbrush so that I could push it through those holes. As I was adding my pennants on, I just made sure that I was always going down through the front of the pennant, running the ribbon along the back side, and then running the ribbon up through the back side to the front again. And I really love how this blue and white buffalo check looks with the yellow and orange colors of the sunflowers. The great thing about punching those holes in the cardboard to add the pennants onto is that once you hang this across your mantle or bookshelf or wherever you'd like to use it, you can slide these pennants pretty easily back and forth so that you can space them out however you like. Remember in the summer I used some fabric from the Dollar Tree to cover a stack of books. Well, today I took all of the fabric off of those 3 books, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to retheme these to fit my sunflower theme. I'm going to be using some brown paper bags to cover my books, but if you don't have any brown paper bags laying around, you can always just buy a roll of craft paper from the Dollar Tree or any other craft store. I'll also be using a few other supplies like these paper sunflowers and some jute twine. To get started, I cut the bottom off of my paper bag and I laid it flat so that it would be easier to cut. Then I laid my book down and I cut my paper so that it was about a half an inch taller than my book. I wanted to add more texture to my paper, so I just started crumbling it up and rolling it into a ball and wrinkling it all over the surface so that the entire thing would be textured, and that helped blend in the lines from where the bag was previously folded. This also helps break down the fibers in the paper, and it makes it a little bit easier to work with, especially when you're wrapping it around something like a book. Next, I laid my book down to one side and I opened up the cover, and I'm just using a small piece of clear tape to hold that cover on the inside of my book. Then I rolled it to the other side. I cut off a bit of the excess and then I used another piece of tape to hold it in place. And you can see here, there is extra paper at the top and bottom of my book, but I'd rather have a little bit extra than not enough. So that's why I always cut it bigger to start with, because once I have the paper wrapped around the book, it's a lot easier to trim off the excess and not have to worry about there not being enough paper. I repeated that 2 more times so that all 3 of my books would be covered. Now, I really love the weathered look, especially from the wrinkling of the paper, but I wanted to enhance that a little bit more. So I got out my Tim Holtz Distress inks, and I'm using the color Vintage Photo with one of my ink blending tools. I always get questions about the ink blenders and the case that I keep my inks in, so I'll make sure that I have both of those linked down below. I'm just taking my ink blending tool and I'm rubbing it all over the surface of one of my books. There's only going to be one book that you need to do the top and the sides on, because the other 2 will be on the bottom, so you really only have to worry about the edges of the other 2 books. But for the top book, you want to make sure that you get ink all over the top of it too, because you'll be able to see that. I really concentrated a lot of the ink at the corners of the book and especially on the spine, because I figured if you want to give it that weathered look, you really want to concentrate some of that color where there are sharp corners and edges and where something would just naturally weather more. After all of my inking was done, then I just used some hot glue to attach all 3 of my books together. And I was really careful to make sure that I kept the book that I had inked on the surface as my top book. Then using some jute twine on the bottom side of my stack, I added a little dot of hot glue, laid my jute twine into it, and then I used a piece of clear tape to hold that while I wrapped it around the book. I wrapped it around several times, and I didn't mind if the rope crisscrossed on itself because I like that look. And then I used more hot glue and clear tape to hold it in place. On the sides of the books where the spines were, I used another piece of the same jute cord and I fished it through. I cinched all of those ropes together and tied it into a simple bow. As a final embellishment, I just added some hot glue to the back of one of those paper sunflowers and glued it to the center of my bow. Now, I always like to drape a wood bead garland over my stacked books, so I was really surprised to find that the Dollar Tree had some really cute ones, including one that had sunflowers on it. But the thing I did not like about this wood bead garland is that it had a really flimsy looking tassel on the one end and the other end was just a loop. So I wanted to give this just a bit of an upgrade. For the side with the flimsy tassel, I just cut the tassel off and I left the strings so that I could tie a new tassel on. And using the same jute cord that I had wrapped around the books, I just created a tassel and tied that to the one end. On the other end, I cut that loop off as close as I could to the knot. Then using 2 more of those paper sunflowers, I just laid the knot into the backside of one of the sunflowers and then hot glued the other one on top. But you could also create a second tassel for this end if you'd prefer that look. And I think this was a really simple way to give this pretty wood bead garland a nice upgrade. The next time you're at the Dollar Tree, grab a pack of the wooden clothespins and I'll show you how you can make a fun sunflower out of these. In addition to the clothespins, I'm also going to use one wood slice and some giant wooden craft sticks that I get from Walmart. Now, from time to time, the Dollar Tree does have wooden slices, but I just got this big box from Amazon and I've been working my way through it. I'll make sure I have that linked below. I started by taking the spring out of my clothespins. Now, for my sunflower, I needed 25 of these altogether, but you might want to take apart a few extra just in case you need a few more. This is pretty easy to do. I usually just twist the two pieces and the spring pops out pretty easily. Then I took all of my separated clothespins and I just glued them back to back. Now I'm using wood glue here. I use the Gorilla Glue sticks and they hold up pretty well for me when I'm just dealing with wood, but you could also use wood glue or use a combination of wood glue and hot glue. I was inspired to make this sunflower from these wooden trivets that I had made last summer in a video. I made these for in my camper. If you missed that video, I'll make sure I have a link to that in the description box. After all of my bundles were glued together, then I started assembling them to form a circle. I added some hot glue on the narrow end of the bundle and then I just stuck the next one up next to it. Now, because of the shape of these bundles, this will just naturally form a circle on its own as you glue them all together. Like I said, I used 25 for my sunflower, but depending on what clothespins you're using, you may need more or less. And the trickiest part of this is getting the last one in. You have to get glue on both sides and kind of wiggle your way in between the two in the circle. I also recommend using something to protect your surface because it is easier to glue these as they're laying flat. That way you can make sure that your flower is also going to lay flat. So I'm using a silicone mat here because some of the hot glue will come out through the bottom. To make this just a bit more sturdy, I cut a circle out of some chipboard. You could use cardboard or anything that you have on hand. And then I hot glued this. This is the back side of my sunflower. You can't really see it on camera, but there are a few places where some of that hot glue came through. And I just hot glued that chipboard circle to the back side. Now that everything's put together, I'm going to give this a quick coat of paint. I'm using some yellow chalk paint here, and I did my best to get inside all of the spaces, but because the yellow color blended in with the natural wood of the clothespins, I wasn't too worried if a little bit of that wood showed through. I wanted my wood slice to be just a bit darker, so I'm using the Antique Wax by Waverly. I'm applying it with a baby wipe just to deepen up the color of the wood. While my paint was drying, I wanted to get to work on the background for my sunflower. I took 7 of those giant wood craft sticks and I laid them side by side. Then I took a few more of them and I just cut the ends off so that they would fit inside all 7 of those. And then I used some hot glue to glue them across the surface of the sticks. This is just going to hold all of the sticks together. You're not actually going to see these sticks from the front. It was just an easy way to make sure that they all stayed connected. I like the distressed look, so I used some white chalk paint and I dry brushed it all over the surface of my craft sticks. Now, if you didn't want to bother creating a background with these craft sticks, if you have any scrap wood laying around, you could do that and then just paint it or stain it to fit your taste. Now that everything's dry, I can put it all together. So I added some hot glue to the back side of my wood slice and added it to the center of my clothespins. Then I used more hot glue and I just glued my sunflower to my craft sticks. And as a final touch, I wanted to cover up the hole that came at the top of that wood slice, so I just added a simple jute bow. I wanted to be able to hang this, so I did use some burlap ribbon. I hot glued it to the back side of my craft sticks, and I was able to hang it with that. Thanks so much for coming to hang out with me again today. If you want even more sunflower inspiration, check out one of the videos I left on the screen. All right, everyone, I hope you have a great week, and I'll talk to you in the next one.